Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Maddison Harris. I'm a Senior People Advisor here at Employment Hero, and joining me is my colleague, Amanda Gordon, our People Partner. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping points to keep in mind. So the session is going to be recorded and it will be shared along with some extra resources across this week. And if you do have any questions during the presentation, feel free to drop them in the Q&A box below. We've set some time aside at the end to answer them. So stick around and we'll do our best to get through them all. We're excited to really dive into a practical session on mastering performance reviews. And we've got a fantastic agenda here to guide you through today. When we talk performance reviews, we're talking about the cyclical performance assessments, and we'll start with the purpose, the why behind it all. We know that for many of you, our performance reviews might feel like a bit of an annual trip to the dentist, necessary, but perhaps a little dreaded. You're busy running your business, juggling 1,000 things, and adding another administrative burden probably isn't high on your wish list. But what if we told you that performance reviews could be one of your most powerful yet underutilized tools for growing your business? It isn't simply just about ticking boxes. It's really turning reviews into a strategic driver for engagement, growth, and real business impact. And our goal today is to provide practical, actionable strategies that fit with your reality and directly translate to better results for your team and your bottom line. We'll also show you how a tool like Employment Hero HR can make this not just possible, but easy and genuinely effective.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the introduction, Mads. I'm so happy to be here. And if, like us, you are a fellow HR professional, a people manager, or someone developing into one of those roles, or simply curious about the performance review process, we'd love to hear your perspective in this area via a poll before we dive right in. So if you're like me and you've set up this webinar to be playing in the background and you're in another tab, feel free now to bring us back to the forefront just for a little moment so we can grab your thoughts in this area. And so we'd be keen to know what your biggest challenge with performance reviews are, whether that's you're implementing, facilitating, or engaging in these. So are you, is it the case of getting managers to follow through and complete performance reviews with their team, ensuring performance reviews are meaningful for employees, aligning reviews with strategic business goals, or the time and administrative burden that perhaps this may incur? And for many of you, this may be a relatively fresh topic, or you may have a fresh view in this area, as traditionally many companies may tend to do performance reviews with remuneration reviews, which do tend to align with the start or just before the new financial year. So we'll just give you a few seconds to pop in your votes. We can give them a review. Wow, I can have a look at those there. There is a mix. So we have a close tie there. Getting managers to follow through, we have 36%, and making them meaningful for employees at 38%. Now, I don't know whether that's surprising to you. I perhaps thought that time and admin burden might be right up there. But that's very good insight. Thank you so much for that. Now I'm going to hand back over to Mads.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks everyone for answering the poll. I thought the results were also interesting. I would have also thought time and admin burden. So let's kind of strip away the traditional formal rigmarole that's often associated with performance reviews. Really, at its core, a performance review is a dedicated conversation, a two-way street between a manager and an employee. Its true purpose is to really clarify expectations, celebrate wins, identify growth opportunities, and plan for future successes. It's about empowering your team and ensuring everyone is pulling in the same direction. When employees clearly understand their goals, they focus their efforts effectively, leading to increased productivity, and enhanced productivity directly translates to better business outcomes and improved profitability. Our research shows that employees crave feedback. So 65% are actively seeking more of it, and 69% say that they would work harder in their efforts if they were better recognized. When your team feels valued and knows where they stand, engagement soars, reducing stress and uncertainty. And this really creates a positive workplace, reducing costly employee turnover and the time and expense of constant hiring and training. Reviews help you recognize high potential employees early and invest in their growth. Developing your internal talent reduces the need to hire externally for senior roles, saving recruitment costs and ensuring leadership continuity. And it's the best investment you'll ever make in your people. Regular discussions help you identify areas for improvement before they escalate into major issues or costly mistakes. Imagine catching a small dip in customer satisfaction early, allowing you to course correct before it impacts your brand reputation and customer loyalty. I want to dive a little bit into kind of the performance and feedback. It isn't necessarily to create a rigid process with tight deadlines, but to foster an intentional approach to performance that's flexible to your business. That means proactive, clear, and consistent, ensuring every conversation has a purpose, drives tangible results. Employment Hero is designed to make this intentionally straightforward and impactful. Before any review even happens, successful performance reviews are built on really strong foundations. Think of these as your essential toolkit. How can anyone hit target if they don't know what they're aiming for? A well-defined job description isn't just about a HR document, it's about a blueprint for success in that role. It outlines responsibilities, reporting lines, and the essential skills required. Once you have the what, you'll then need to know the how well. This is when your KPIs come in. They are quantifiable targets that really clearly define success for that role. And we're talking about specifics like achieving 90% customer satisfaction or processing 50 invoices daily, rather than vague statements like be more productive. Beyond daily tasks, connecting individual effort to the bigger picture is also vital. So this means setting clear and inspiring goals. Whatever framework you use, the key is having a shared understanding of what success looks like for your business. It's important to capture a culture of feedback, doing this early and often, and it's paramount to really avoiding surprises for both you and your employees. So performance reviews should never feel like the first time an employee hears about a challenge or celebrates a win. Instead, foster a culture of ongoing feedback, positive, constructive, and delivered early and often. Regular check-ins, even short ones, really builds trust and allows for course correction in real time. So this approach really means that when a formal review comes around, it's simply a summary of the conversations that have already happened, and it genuinely goes without any surprises for you or the employee, making a much more positive and productive experience. I'd love to chuck it to Amanda.
Yeah, and I just want to speak to that point a little bit. I think whether, like us, you work in HR or you're a manager or you've seen it with your own managers or peers that are people managers, it can be the case that it may not be natural to give continuous feedback. And therefore, it may just be kind of, I'll wait until a formal performance review and give it, which to me actually seems scarier because if you are, like you said, Mads, implementing those continuous real-time feedback loops, expectation settings with job descriptions and KPIs, it can be like incremental micro doses, which then makes it authentic, continuous, and makes sense. Whereas if we leave it to be ambiguous or unclear, and then bam, we have a formal performance review where we have no choice but to give very clear and direct feedback, but it has been left until that point, it may be met with more concern or confrontation because there wasn't kind of an understood expectation that that is where that employee was at that one time. And giving feedback is hard. And it's not something that, like I said, comes naturally to some managers. And that's absolutely fine. And what I want to speak to in the next few slides now is how EH as a software can help instill these kind of continuous conversations, coachings, check-ins, and tools to form part of a natural people management cycle. So it seems less daunting and more instilled as a natural thing to do as a people manager. Bernie, if I could just have the next slide, that would be amazing. And so here, whether you are a local family-run business or a large corporate enterprise, we have features that can be tailored to flex to what suits your businesses or you as a HR professional or manager, whatever you think would suit that business's goals, needs, size, and culture. And so we can see a couple of the features that speaks to Mads's point in laying those foundational performance-based conversations. Particular highlights that I've advised clients on in a consultancy level, but also internally here at EH as our people partner is the one-to-one feature. Now, one-to-ones are naturally employee-led, right? But by having them set in a system, you can have them automated. So both the manager and employee can receive notifications when an upcoming one-to-one is coming up and scheduled for, so that you can be intentional and be more efficient and have more meaningful conversations in that one-to-one. They can have prompts, so you can have them tailored to a particular team or particular employees based on what you want to talk about. So perhaps examples would be what achievements have you achieved in this period over this fortnight? Have you been met with any barriers that I can help you with? Basically talking to successes and also perhaps career growth. How are you tracking with your career goals? How are you tracking with a particular strategic goal as well? Ahead of those meetings with those prompts, both the employee and the manager can also go in there and draft notes. So if, for example, I have things throughout that fortnight that I know that I want to not necessarily bring to my manager's attention straight away into day-to-day operations, I'll save it for a one-to-one. I can add in talking points and notes in there ahead of time, again, making that one-to-one more valuable time shared by both parties. When you are putting in your talking points, you could then have like an area to reflect back on. So let's just say, I don't know, a 6-month or 12-month period has happened. As a manager, you're now conducting a formal review, and you can go back and review your one-to-one conversations, which perhaps would highlight the successes and challenges met with that particular employee that you can refer back to. In terms of reviews, the reviews feature you can set up again. It can be tailored to the needs of the business. So you can use that feature to set up probationary reviews. So whether you wanted to have a 3, 6, and 9-month check-in, you could have KPI check-ins. And also, speaking to the purpose of this webinar, you could set up more formal performance reviews, whether that be biannually, annually, or whatever frequency again would suit. And I'm going to speak to what that looks like more on the next slide. And then finally, another key feature, sorry, before I move on to that, is a very powerful tool that is the 360 review feature. And that's designed again to complement perhaps a traditional performance review by providing a broader perspective on an employee's performance and development. The tool gathers feedback from multiple sources, so including peers, managers, and even clients, to offer that well-rounded view of how an employee is perceived across different relationships. And again, to encourage honest and constructive input that would aid that formal performance review. And it can be set as anonymous, can never say that word, anonymous, to encourage that honest and constructive feedback and a variety of viewpoints. Okay, so now we're on the slide, perfect. Speaking to the reviews feature that I was just talking about, which again, you could set up to be probation reviews, KPI check-ins, goal check-ins, but also your company's formal performance reviews. It looks like this, so you can choose the cadence. Again, biannually or annually. You can specify who is involved. So whether it's a particular department or team, the whole company, because there may be, of course, different questions. You may have questions for your individual contributors. You may have different questions or review criteria for your leadership team. So that can also be set differently. You can adjust what rating scales, if you would like one in there, what questions, what comment fields. Again, very much can be tailored to what you would like it to look like. And there can be set periods. So I'm just reminding myself as I'm talking. You can set periods of when you can request employees to complete a review, which will make more sense in the next slide, and when managers can conduct their reviews, and when you would like it to ultimately be completed. So moving to the next slide, you can see this in more detail here. So if we're speaking to a traditional, annual or biannual formal performance review, you may have particular questions. So I was just looking earlier to see, for as an example, let's just say you have a question that is aligned to something strategic for your particular company, like, please talk to me how you demonstrated our company values for this review period, or how you have contributed to our AI strategy this period. The employee will then go in, answer the question. So if you have a rating scale, you can, that employee can then rate themselves. In this example, it's between 1 to 5. And internally, you may then have like references to what would define someone as a 1 or a 5. And then the employee can then put in the comment section their justification for that rating. Again, perhaps encouraging that employee to include any specific examples or metrics for that justification. They would then complete their review. They can save as a draft as they go along, but once they've completed it, they will press publish, and then that will flow through and notify their people manager. My employees completed their assessment. Now I can go in and draft my review. So you can see in that screenshot on the right, then the manager can then type in their rating score and their feedback for that employee and justification. Then at the bottom, you could have you can also weight the scoring. So you can have an overall weighting of the scoring, and then that manager would then conduct the formal performance review verbally with that employee, having that two-way conversation. I think you achieved this and this, and I noted your feedback that you've provided here, blah, blah, blah. We've finished and finalized that conversation. The manager will then publish their comments after that conversation, because there might be some things they might want to add during the conversation. And then that will save in the employee's EH profile and can be used as a reference point. Again, if you were to look back year on year about how that employee has been tracking, which could be useful for other things, whether it's later performance management or promotions or looking at remuneration reviews, as I'd mentioned earlier. Let me see what I'm speaking to with this slide. So here, as I just mentioned, with compensation reviews and promotions, we do have a compensation tool as well. You can also see our goals feature tool there as well. So again, speaking to what Maz was speaking about earlier, setting the foundation with job descriptions, KPIs, goal settings, you can have that clearly within the system, and that can be done in a web format. So you can set goals with the company level, leadership level, team level, individual level, and so that cascades up to, you can see what percentage and how employees are tracking in cascading up and meeting strategic goals. And so you would use that as a reference point, as well as the formal performance review and any other internal metrics that you may use when being able to then justify someone's remuneration increase, or perhaps advocating for a potential promotion or the creation of a new role that perhaps an employee is ready to move into. So we're now moving from kind of guesswork and to strategic thinking in, workforce management. I think I've covered everything there, but Mads, please feel free to jump in and add. I lost my footing a bit on that last slide.
Thanks, Amanda. No, I think that was really clear. I guess, now that we've covered really, our version of how to conduct those performance reviews, and you've seen in the system, the next step's really about having the conversation with your employees. We touched on preparation earlier, but it bears repeating. For a truly productive conversation, both you and your employee should be coming prepared. Like Amanda walked through, Employment Hero really facilitates this by allowing employees to complete that self-assessment beforehand, really encouraging them to reflect on their achievements, challenges, aspirations. The manager's role is then to review that self-assessment, gather their own specific examples, and identify areas of discussion, both strengths and opportunities. Think of this as a strategic partnership meeting, not a lecture. Here's how to kind of make it intentional and productive. So always starting on a positive note, set a constructive tone, clearly state the purpose, and that it's about their growth, development, and future success within the business. It really puts your employee at ease and really opens up. Encourage your employee to share their perspective first. Ask them to walk you through their self-assessment, discussing their achievements and where they see opportunities for growth. Then share your feedback. Provide some specific evidence-based examples that really support your feedback, both in achievements and in the areas for improvement. Instead of you need to be more organized, say, I noticed in the last project, you missed the initial deadline by 3 days, which caused a ripple effect for the marketing team. We really want to work together to establish a clear, measurable objectives then for the next period. So these should align with their role, the business goals, and their professional aspirations. It's essential to actively listen throughout the conversation and avoid dominating. Ask open-ended questions like, how do you feel you could improve in this area? Or what support or training would help you achieve this goal? If there are differences in opinion, remain calm and objective. Use concrete examples to clarify misunderstandings, invite their perspective, and note areas of disagreement, as well as agreed upon next steps within the review. Remember, every point, every agreed upon goal, and every area for development should be captured, which you can do in Employment Hero. This isn't about Big Brother, it's about providing a clear, accessible record for both of you to refer back to, track progress against, and really ensure consistency over time. And the conversation doesn't end when the meeting does. You know, you want to keep checking in. The real magic is really about growth, accountability, and that happens after the review. The ongoing conversation is how you truly commit to your team's success and keep those goals alive. Think of it like the review sets the direction, but continuous follow-ups really ensures that you hit that destination. Amanda, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, nailed it.
So we've saved some time to really dig into specific questions. If you want to start dropping them in the Q&A box. Perhaps we discuss maybe the poll results.
Absolutely. Can we still see them?
So
well, also, I have a question that, oh, there we go. In the interim, I have a question a lot that comes through is how often should we be conducting formal performance reviews? And so I think the answer to that really, well, there's two areas to look at first. Well, what is the size of the company and kind of any of business context, culture, nature of what you're looking at, you know, small not-for-profit in one industry versus a large corporate, perhaps sales-driven environment, very different. And what is the purpose of the performance review? If you are having those regular conversations, perhaps quarterly, perhaps you're sales-driven and you have quarterly targets, and then you're not just talking about targets in your reviews, you're also talking about career growth, you know, connection to like company goals, culture, all of those things, then perhaps it doesn't warrant having a annualized formal performance reviews because you're having those regular discussions. However, if those formal performance reviews are linked to remuneration reviews, if you do in fact have those annually, then it makes sense to align it to that. But I think our key message here is that traditionally it is conducted annually. Traditional isn't to be used as a negative term. It's obviously worked for a significantly long time, and I would say bare minimum, 100% do that. At least you're doing that. But if it's I think there's a movement into conducting these more frequently, then we should move to that. Again, because I guess the purpose of a formal performance review is making sure that you and that employee are aligned with how they are tracking with strategic goals. But then what is the difference between a one-to-one and a formal performance review? You don't want to be having the two happening at the same frequency. I'll be having those regular one-to-ones. You know, you're checking in with your employees probably on a day-to-day basis, but meeting weekly or fortnightly to just check in on how things are going, but then having a more intentional conversation about performance and career growth, secondary to that. But I just went on a tangent, so I don't even know if I answered my own question. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And it definitely gave a bit of time. We've got some answers flowing into the chat. So I'll read out the first one. So, kind of our view on linking performance reviews to the annual REM review cycle. So, from my perspective, like Amanda had mentioned, a traditional approach to performance reviews is annually. So it can give you a really good guardrail that at least once per year, you're looking at those annual remuneration reviews. And then those remuneration reviews, whatever promotions or salary increases, are directly tied back to, a full holistic approach to that employee's role, their performance, and should be able to give you a lot of structure when you're moving forward and, providing a business case to whoever that may be on that REM review. Amanda, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, no, I agree. It just provides insights and justifications in the strategic approach. And I also love this second question that we've got in, who actually, oh, it's moved, who actually owns performance reviews, managers or HR? Really good question. And I think it's both. So I think it should be a collaborative process in that HR would help support in designing and implementing a performance review if, in fact, you have a HR team. And therefore, then the manager would definitely contribute to what a review would look like. For example, perhaps what cadence, what questions or talking points would be relevant to particular roles or teams. And perhaps timeliness. When would be the best time? Like I've already said that before, but sort of again, the best time to roll out a review. For example, if it's end of financial year and you have a payroll team, you're probably not going to be wanting to conduct formal reviews during that period. So collaborative approach, HR, if you have a team or a person, definitely to help design and implement, manager to actually collaboratively contribute to the design, but also then execute.
Amazing. Thanks, Amanda. There's a few questions around businesses without KPIs and how to start introducing them into your business. And, change is never an easy thing for anyone. It's really about driving kind of the purpose and the why behind your decision. If your goal is to make sure that yearly you're reviewing performance, making sure that you as a business is meeting their growth and development goals, keeping them retained, share that with them. The other part is you can also get them involved in helping understand what great success looks like for in that role. It doesn't have to always come from top down, especially if you're a small or medium business that hasn't had any metrics before. Start by feedback. Amanda, did you have anything else you wanted to?
Well, someone's just asked if we can actually show a performance review in the system. I'm just seeing if I can find one that I can actually share. And I do have a test one. So let me just see if I can share my screen. Send request. Perhaps I need to be authorized to share. Bernie, can I do it now? Yeah. Splendid. All right.
Somebody also asked about promoting accountability, and if this is accountability for your managers and team that are having those reviews with your employees, that's a part of a reflection on their performance review. So it can be feedback that you give to them, and it's always really connecting it back to the purpose. If your goal in the business is to grow by X amount of clients or sell this amount of things, the way that flows on to each particular role is what really drives that accountability. And the expectation is there to make sure that everyone's having feedback and share these stats that you've learnt today around kind of 65% really wanting more of that feedback.
Fabulous. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. Now, I unfortunately don't have, can you see that, Mads?
Yeah.
Okay. Unfortunately, I don't have like an interactive version, but hopefully this like blown up version, and this is a test example, this isn't my own review, just so we're all aware, of what it would look like. So you would have questions. So for here, we have like some prompts, role effectiveness, how effectively have you applied your role, specific skills, tools, and processes. And so you could have the key questions, but then also kind of a definition to help explain that a bit more. Like I said, you can then rate, and you can change these references to. You see where it says like exceptional impact, strong contributor. You can change that to whatever it suits your culture, like absolute legend, not quite there. You know what I mean? And then you can add in, again, it's not interactive, but this is where you can insert the comments. As you can see, my manager's test comment is bloody spectacular. We love to see it. And then so you have those questions, and then, as I mentioned, you can have an overall rating, and you can have this weighted in the system too. So, for example, if I got 5 stars in all of these areas, so 100%, it would automatically calculate a score. And then if you are a system user, you would have a list of all the employees and managers that have completed the assessment. You can pull a report to track where everyone's at. I know X amount of employees have completed, but this many employees haven't completed their review, so therefore we're not fully finished here. And the genuine, I can see in the list how people are scoring. So we can pull real statistics from this, and therefore we can report to high level, whether it be a board of directors, CEO, operational manager, how that particular team, person, department is performing. And then once that's completed, it will sit here in the performance. So this is, I'm not going to scroll up. This is like an employee's personal profile example, and there's different tiles for different areas here. But under performance, you can see that review, and then that's how I would access that review for that employee, but vice versa, the employee would also be able to access it from there. And that's that question.
Amazing. We've got a few more coming in. So next one was, do you have a meeting with team members individually after to check if they're happy with the REM review results? It's a great question. I think, terminology here is really important. It's not that they're happy or unhappy with the results. It's about making sure that we're really aligned in understanding of expectations and things are really, really clear. So when you're going through this review and they're doing a self-review and you as a manager are reviewing that back to them, transparently share where you're seeing them positioned at and have some really clear examples as to why that's the case. That's going to flow into those REM reviews or anything to do with compensation. So you've got really clear examples that are targeted to goals, OKRs, KPIs, however you measure them. And it's not just a vague response like overall, you've done a pretty good job here. That's going to be really hard to have them understand the purpose and the why behind your decision.
Nice. Catherine's question's just speaking out to me. Catherine's put, would you recommend HR sitting in on reviews to get consistency through the business? Great question. I think, again, it depends on the size and the presence of HR within the business, because I do think like we can't say that there's one size fits all or a blanket approach, because there's nuances. There's different industries. You could be trades, you could be super corporate, you could have a HR team that is kind of that isn't so present, or someone who's like in the office day to day. My general stance would be to, as long as that you've set up the foundations, i.e., just you've set up this review, whatever it looks like in EH or manually, and what perhaps, indicators for what a 1 scoring is or a 5 scoring is, you should then have the framework set up for then managers to be able to facilitate on their own. And then I would just seek feedback from managers on that process immediately after. If someone was particularly uncertain or a new manager, I'd perhaps spend the time with them before to coach them through how to give feedback, because again, it's not a natural thing to do for a lot of people, and especially if you're having to have a tough conversation, because not everyone is a superstar, unfortunately. But why I say that is you don't want to kind of lean into it's HR's responsibility, because I think that conversation really lands better with the manager. They're working close day to day, and then boom, with HR's here. Kind of like, we don't want it to be a negative connotation, but we also want it to be relevant for that person and comfortable. I think when there's more people in the conversation, it does feel more formal and uncomfortable in some circumstances. But that said, if in the nature of Catherine, your company that you're working in, you're there, it would make sense, at least for the first round for standardization, or feedback to like help kind of fine tune that process, absolutely. But I think if you've done the groundwork beforehand, it might not be necessary.
Perfect. Just reading through the next ones here. It's a great question. How often should development goals be revisited after a review? This is, like Amanda has said a few times, it really does depend on the size of your business, what your business goals are. For me, I've always seen that a quarterly goal revisit can be really helpful. So you're planning the next 3 months ahead rather than the next 12. 3 feels like a really easy amount to kind of see ahead. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel. And yeah, I would say quarterly. And then, you don't have to necessarily do a formal review at this point in time. It can be a really easy cadence. It can happen in a one-on-one conversation. Yeah. Anything else that you'd like to add, Amanda?
No, that was great. This one's just screamed out to me because it's got my name in it. It's moved. Where is this performance review template available that we've just seen from myself? So in the system, and this goes for a lot of the EH features, there is lots of templates. So for example, if you're implementing policies, there's generic templates, and that would be based in New Zealand. Or if you have aspects of your business that are in other countries, there may also be standard policy templates for those other regions too. Likewise, for reviews, there is also a standard template that you can use. And so we do like to have that so that you can kind of have a base level to like get the ground. My sayings are not coming out today. Just get things moving, but also then have the ability to tailor it. Also, EH provides services if your business was at all interested. So if you were looking for a outsourced HR advisor or people partner, they can help provide guidance into tailoring or coming up with what perhaps should be embedded in your review questions for your specific company.
Perfect. So what is a good lead time for employees to prepare for performance reviews? What a great question. And my initial response is, how long is a piece of string? There's absolutely no right or wrong answer here. Take into account an employee's role. If they're scheduled 9 to 5 in a really heavy reactive environment, answering phones, potentially you want to make sure that you're allocating enough lead time and maybe dedicating a block out of their day to really be able to reflect and review. If you've got someone who really loves feedback and they're always the first to the mark, perhaps they need maybe a week or two to complete this. But look at it from a holistic approach, and you want to make sure that the employees have enough time, but also managers have enough time. Otherwise, you run the risk of having those conversations rushed, not intentional, not completely related to the purpose or the goal that you're trying to set. So try not to rush them through. Take your time.
Yeah, I generally say like in terms of actual timelines, I would generally say like because you kind of also don't want to give too much time. Otherwise, it's like, oh yeah, I'll push that can down the street. So maybe between 1 to 2 weeks, again, depending on I think we also have to be relevant and relative in our approach. Like, we don't, like I said, with the example of end of financial year and you have a payroll team, you need to get this done within 5 days. Again, I think there's so many different contexts, but perhaps between 1 to 2 weeks, depending on what's happening. Then I saw one on what are methods to foster a safe space for employees to be vulnerable during performance reviews. Great question. I think number one, preparation, which we've just covered. So they have the ability, because like me, I can't think of the spot. I think we've realized this during this webinar. Time to prepare, then being taken seriously. So they have a scheduled meeting with scheduled time, and it's just not like they can see the managers doing a tick box exercise perhaps, and it's kind of like a last minute need to do second thought. So intentionally scheduling time, whether you're doing it in person, ensuring it is in a space where people can speak freely, and perhaps someone's not looking in, Perhaps time of day. If someone is really busy during the day and they're not going to be in the headspace to have an intentional conversation, think about that too, because then they might not feel like they'd be able to present during that conversation as perhaps they would have done better at a different time of day or a different day entirely. And then in terms of like the actual conversation itself, again, I think this comes down to the manager, which can come from self-education or coaching, is tone. There's no reason, even if you're going to have a tough conversation, because it's not all sunshines and rainbows, it doesn't mean it's negative. This is all meant to be, we're all headed in the same direction to a positive place. And I think there's definitely a difference. And I say this all the time with, there's a difference between being nice and being kind. I think being nice would be not being truthful, clear, or accurate in your delivery of constructive feedback. But being kind is being very clear and direct. So don't be nice and fake and skip over it. And there's kind of a different what's coming out to what you're actually feeling. Be kind, because giving honest feedback and constructive feedback with a positive and supportive tone is going to, we hope, give that employee what they need to move into whatever direction they need to move into. And again, if you're having those regular conversations, it shouldn't, that would set the foundation. So it shouldn't be such a leap of a constructed conversation. And then follow up. So it's not like a set and forget. We've had a conversation about concerns or where your career is going or whatever like that. Again, continue that conversation on. So then in turn, where I'm speaking about, I guess, psychological safety here, the employee again feels invested in and valued and supported. So I hope that question answers. Sorry, I hope that answers the question. But yeah, in terms of being vulnerable, I think that would be the way to get that.
Thanks, Amanda. On that, there was also a question around how do you give constructive feedback when the concerns are ongoing and not improving, and then asking if we can do a session on that. Just as a bit of a point, we're going to be sending out some artifacts across the next week, and we are going to include a underperformance webinar from New Zealand. So definitely give that one a little bit of a watch.
Yeah. But on that, again, if there's a performance concern, again, we'll try and keep that separate to an annual formal performance review. Address it immediately and in real time. It becomes quite difficult to address concerns that's happened retrospectively and holding out for that. We want a performance review to focus on, you know, yes, an employee's performance during that relevant period. So there's obviously going to be nuance that if someone is not tracking so well, that's going to form part of this conversation. But if you have someone that's particularly underperforming, hopefully it doesn't align to the day that you're conducting a performance review, and you can address that or start to address it beforehand. I saw a question on what documents should employers bring to reviews and expect employees to bring. Another great question. I would say depends on the role. I wouldn't say they necessarily need to bring something physical unless based on what they do that's relevant. But what I would say is when an employee is conducting a self-review, for example, if there was a question like, again, aligned to a company goal, which may be, tell me about how you've helped continuously improve and embed AI into our day-to-day operations, let's say. Then you may, when the employee's rating themselves, they'll then look to provide a comment or justification to their rating, or they might not even have a rating, but just their own self-assessment, in which then they could provide specific examples. Again, if it's kind of more metric driven, say, I have delivered 4 out of the 5 initiatives, AI initiatives that were set to be achieved in this quarter. Of course, that's very corporate, but it can obviously be adapted to whatever the nature of the role industry is. But I would just say come prepared. In terms of bringing anything, have set questions, allow the employee to self-assess, and also as a manager, draft your responses ahead of that conversation. So that would be the only prep I would say.
Perfect. Thanks, Amanda. The Next question, how to set expectations to employees that performance reviews are not always linked to salary increases. So from my side, it's around being super clear on what the review's really for. If you've got a game plan to go in and this is around growth and development, and you look at remuneration reviews or salary reviews at another point in the year, make sure that that's really clear about what cyclical process falls at which time of the year. So they're not going in with the wrong expectation. You also want to explain to them that continuous growth and development doesn't just always come into the form of a promotion year on year or a salary increase year on year. There's a lot of levels that people can work within their current role where they're developing and then they move into kind of mastering their skill set, or they're starting to stretch within their role. So it's really just about having an open conversation about what that growth and development looks like then. If you've got a plan to promote this person, but it's not for a little bit more time, have the conversation about it, set some really clear goals in place about what are the timelines around meeting your expectations and when they can expect an update.
Nice. There's a question here. What if the managers are not good in confrontation and tend to avoid uncomfortable conversations? I think there's two good questions in that one. So, in terms of a manager avoiding uncomfortable conversations, unfortunately, that does form part of a people manager role. Inevitably, hopefully, never. You might have the most overachieving team ever, but oh my goodness, it's more likely that you're going to have an uncomfortable conversation at some point. And that level of uncomfortability comes down to the individual, right? So in terms of managing that, preparation, I would just ensure that justifications for any kind of constructive feedback is written out. If you've written it out, there's a thought process behind it. It's perhaps justified and there's meaning behind it. It's not just, I guess, down to personal bias or anything like that. Keep it to a point that can be justified in that way. And then it just comes down to practice. The more that manager does it, the more it will become less uncomfortable. And, in some circumstances, depend on the tone or nature of that manager. Sometimes it might be okay to just disarm that and say, look, giving this type of feedback is uncomfortable for me to give it as much as I imagine it is to receive it. Of course, depending on how that conversation is going. I don't like doing this, I assure you, is only to move us forward. And then it's got a positive tone. A lot of the time, it's in the delivery, not the actual content of the messaging. And in terms of, I think confrontation was written in there. Just to address that, I think sometimes there's a misconception that anytime constructive criticism is given, is always going to be met with confrontation. Not always the case. I think it will be surprising to some that some people may be understanding and receptive of constructive and sometimes thankful of constructive feedback, because at least perhaps it shows that that manager is caring to that employee's development. But if it is the case that a manager has been met with perhaps some unnecessary or unwanted confrontation, to diffuse that, you can always pause and just say, okay, I can see, this is a law, or you're reacting in this moment. Perhaps that's not the correct phrase to say, but you could just pause the conversation and then you can pick it up and continue. If you continue to have a conversation where the tensions are heightened, it's perhaps not going to be constructive. And if you can't resume the conversation in a more calm manner, then perhaps the manager can say, let's revisit this another time, but I would love to have this conversation with you again. We can pick it up again tomorrow or whenever it may suit, would be my advice on that one.
Thanks, Amanda. Just check if there's anything else coming through.
There's a question here. Sorry, I saw it earlier. I've just looked at it again now. I work in a trades business. The performance reviews, etc., is not a serious thing. How does one introduce all these processes and ways in a professional and smart way? Great question. And I think that's very common. Trades, fast food industries, retail, or like just even if you're a small but corporate company, you all speak with each other. This seems perhaps something that may be seen as more rigid or formalized. Again, I guess, Mads, we can like brainstorm this, but thinking out loud, I think just make it relative to what they're doing. Like you can change the tone. Like I said, if you're having a rating scale in reviews, have the language suit the environment. Like a 5 out of 5 is an absolute legend, blah, blah, or have the questions be, I don't know, suit that role so it just lands. We don't want to be detached from what employees are doing, otherwise, it just feels like a redundant exercise. And you could just start with implementing just standard, I guess, metrics in how you're monitoring someone's performance. So in the trades industry, I can't think off the top of my head, I'm not so familiar with that industry myself, but just basic kind of like performance stuff. And then if you were to introduce a review relating it to that. So I think it just comes down to language and terminology. So it makes sense for them. And then perhaps rewarding it. Just like any review, um, is to also acknowledge high performers. And I think that goes to the wayside sometimes. You're probably just going through day-to-day operations, and if there's someone underperforming, then they get the hyper focus, but perhaps the overachievers don't perhaps get the same attention. And so perhaps having a review process, and whatever it looks like, would actually be a positive thing that they could see real genuine benefit and value in being a part of. But yeah, I would say implementation, training, and follow through, as opposed to like, we did this thing one time, I don't really understand it, it didn't make sense. But speaking to employees visually, like one to one, I imagine perhaps if it's a trades company, it might be rather large. Um, but yeah, just not sending something through for someone to fill out, having more of a presence if you're looking to implement it for the first time. Maz, what do you reckon on that one?
Yeah, absolutely. And, trades is interesting. You're typically out on a job site. There's not a lot of ways to conduct reviews that may seem easily accessible. There's no reason why you can't do this walking around a site
Yeah,
and having this as a conversation.
yeah.
Right. I think we've got time for a few more. Next one. If you are the business owner who is responsible for HR, how do you get the employee to give feedback without feeling threatened? It's a great question. And I know Amanda had touched heavily on kind of creating a safe environment for employees to share and give open feedback. And I think it really all comes down at the end of the day to preparation and purpose. If people know why you're conducting the review, if they know what they're being measured on, and they can clearly articulate their feedback across the period of time that you've set out for your performance review, chances are they're already going to come to the table with a little bit more of an open mind. If you approach this like it's a manager only one-sided review, absolutely it could feel a little bit threatening to someone walking into that. So transparency is absolutely key here, and really preparing to have those conversations.
Yeah, and also to extend on that, you're the business owner who is also responsible for HR. I again would encourage, like, if you're not the direct manager of the employees, to encourage or upskill your people managers to have those review conversations. So it's not all just sat with you, and those conversations might be more relative to their direct managers. But if you are these employees, like it's quite a flat structure, i.e., everyone reports into you directly, then I don't think it should perhaps instill fear, I think, or whatever the term was used there. I think just being treated as like, they report into you directly makes sense.
And I think the last question, what's a good portion to focus on during performance reviews, such as employee goals, successes, and their role versus aligning to business goals and values? It's a great question, and probably very much dependent on how that person has gone over the period of time that you're assessing. If they're brand new to the role, chances are they're still in their ramp up phase, maybe they don't have a ton of successes under their belt, you want to still give credit where credit is due, but you may be more focusing on what is the current performance and how do you get them to be completely ramped up in their new role. If you've got someone that's really focused on career aspirations and getting promoted within your workforce, potentially it's looking into stretch opportunities for where across the next period of time for assessment, where can they join in that may be outside of their role scope that feels like it would align to where they're headed and start planning ahead for the future. So you may want to talk more aspirationally, but it's going to be very much dependent on person to person. But you should always frame some positives and some constructive pieces in each of the conversations to make sure it's really impactful.
Yeah. I don't know how many, we've got a bit more time. I just saw one on would it be valuable to include attendance into performance KPIs? It's hard again to have a blanket statement. With regards to KPIs, it's more of like the measurable output of a particular metric, i.e., I don't know, if you're in sales, conversions rates, or the amount of calls you're making, whatever it may be, I would focus on the actual KPI in terms of output as opposed to attendance. Naturally, if someone's not attending work, I think you need to look at the reason. For example, if they are off for genuine reasons, they have long-term sickness, they have a sick family member, whatever it may be, you then need to look to adjust the KPIs. But yeah, I would keep the two separate. And if the attendance needs to be looked at because perhaps there is a belief that it's not genuine or it's so long term that, perhaps they might not be able to return to their role to achieve their KPIs, I think that should be treated completely separately. But if it's for a short-term period, then perhaps it's the case that the KPIs actually need to be adjusted. But I don't think that the output of someone's KPIs could be, okay, you haven't attended work on X amount of days. I think keep them separate.
Perfect.
Cool.
So that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you all so much for joining us, and a massive thanks to you on the other side of the screen for joining Amanda and I for this session. We hope you're walking away with a few new ideas and a bit more confidence to make your performance reviews more impactful and meaningful. If you'd like to revisit anything we've covered, we'll be sending out the session recording and some extra resources to help you take the next step with your review process. And, if you're curious to see how Employment Hero can support your team, whether you're an active customer or maybe the first time you're hearing about it, definitely get in touch with us and feel free to book a demo because we'd love to show you around it.
Thanks, everyone.